panelists here. We have Ramon Moreno. He is the CEO of Mitsui Power Americas. And Bry Collins of OSI Soft, one of the biggest privately owned software companies in the world. And we have Dr. Tom Braticic of Hewlett-Packard Enterprises. I want to start off by saying I didn't know anything about AI in the energy sector until a year ago when I had some interviews with oil companies that explained to me they're going to get rid of 40% of their workforce out in the oil field as a result of adding machine learning and AI to the maintenance of their operations. So I wanted to start by asking our panelists, is this real? Are we really going to cut 40% of the workers in parts of the energy sector by using machine learning? Who wants to get into that one first? Is that a real number?
Want me to start? Sure. I mean, I think like all of these stats, I think it always depends. It depends on the industry, the asset. I think that specific one was upstream oil and gas. It was in the Wall Street Journal as well, pretty popular article. I mean, I think absolutely there's opportunity for doing things like that, but I think that's not necessarily always the goal, to reduce workforce.
It's not only about reducing workforce. What else are these companies getting besides fewer people to pay?
I mean, that specific article talked about actually improvements in performance as well, right? It talked about up to 400% or something like that. The number is right, but it's hundreds of percentage of better production efficiency. And so I don't know that it's not always necessarily just about reducing people.
Tom, to some extent, these companies are pushing their computing to the edge. The edge is the big concept that we're going to hear about here. To what extent does the edge give them more of an edge in keeping their operations optimized?
One way to achieve some of the efficiencies you talked about, some of the labor reduction perhaps, is to do things at the edge. And what is the edge? The edge is a place. And in oil and gas and energy, a place could be the power plant, it could be the refinery. It could also be a drill rig or an oil rig or a power plant that's delivering the energy. The edge is a place that's not the data center. That's a good way to look at it. So as your question, when we push out compute power in this specific dimension of computer science called artificial intelligence and a subset of machine learning, we push that out to the edge. There are 7 benefits that can be achieved. And we don't have enough time necessarily to go through them. But they're similar to the 7 benefits of not sending the data to the cloud. And AI is among, especially the compilation of a machine in a machine learning, is among the highest compute activities that businesses are doing and will do today. So it's very tempting to do it back in the data center where there's tremendous compute and storage power. Contrary-wise, the 7 reasons to push that computing out to the edge and not have to go back and thrash to the data center do include latency and real-time response. How soon do you want to know your asset, your drill, is heating up or is in the wrong direction? And then there are 6 more we might pick up in the conversation here.
Okay. Now, Ramon, how many power plants does your company operate in Mexico?
Well, we're operating right now 8 power plants in Mexico.
8 power plants
and
here.
We have another under construction. So we have combined cycles, wind power plants, and we are now looking at solar and cogeneration projects, basically in Mexico, but also looking at the whole Americas. So yeah, with that, we are the 2nd largest private producer in Mexico.
The 2nd largest producer in Mexico. So how are you utilizing or hoping to utilize machine learning at these operations?
Well, we are now actually working with Spark Cognition. We are utilizing a Spark Predict, making a proof of concept test. And in this testing, what we are, this type of software or this type of applications, they are generally known as advanced pattern recognition. And what they are supposed to do, and we are seeing if Spark Cognition can do it, is they alert of a failure before in a way that probably a human cannot detect or a typical alarm system cannot detect. So you have some, what you do there is you build a kind of a parallel or a regression on how the system should behave. And then based on that, if you see a deviation against that pattern, that typical pattern, then it sends an alarm and you can detect the failure before it happens. So it can help you with reliability, which is probably the main concern and the main business in power generation. Power generation is a business of reliability. but it can help also not to do an unnecessary preventive maintenance. If you can rely on the software, if you can rely on the system to tell you when the equipment is going to fail, you avoid unnecessary preventive maintenance, so it can help on efficiency as well.
Yeah. My understanding is that rather than utilizing a cloud-based service for these operations, your computing is done within the perimeter of the power plant, right? It's an edge application. Is that fair?
I mean, it could be said like that. I'm not such an expert on edge. He can probably put the label better than me, but yeah, I mean, the first reaction comes from the control system and the operator. We have this. We have a remote monitoring center. And what it does is it looks at data in a longer time scale, and you can detect things when you look at data from the outside, and when you can look at more data than the operator can do it. So I think with these machine learning tools, what we are trying to do is to enhance the operator abilities. And going back, I wanted to say something about the job substitution.
Yes.
In business like ours, I think job substitution is not the target. Actually, this is a very capital-intensive business, and there are many businesses like this one. So we're hearing in the morning about Boeing and aviation. Probably the cost of the pilot is not significant. The reliability, the safety, and probably the fuel cost is much more important than the cost of the operator. I think when we are talking about these tools, we want to enhance human performance. We want to avoid human errors. We want to elevate what the soul brain can do it, and that's exactly what we are looking for. And APR, advanced pattern recognition, is just one of the things that we could apply. There are many potential other things that we could do.
May I support that with an
please.
example? That is not in, just to get a better feel, that's not in the energy sector. There's a manufacturer of goods that is using AI at the edge, meaning the edge is their conveyor belts on the manufacturing floor. And they're able to do it on video and detect issues, indeed better than a human. But the point is it didn't eliminate the job, it assisted the job. And in fact, the production is so high that they're actually hiring because the enterprise is doing better. So I just wanted to underscore a second example.
This is how AI will create jobs rather than destroy jobs?
That is exactly right,
okay.
yes.
Brian, what would you add to this? Tell us more about what OSI Soft does for clients like Ramon.
Yeah, so we've been around for actually 40 years, delivering data to people in operations and engineering so they could innovate. So this idea of getting data and innovating with data is something that's been around for a long time, particularly in the process, energy, oil and gas sectors. And so that's something we've been doing for quite some time. I think one of the biggest challenges that we see with this new technology is it does not replace the expertise of the operations and engineering people. And in fact, if anything, it'll just enhance what they're able to do. There's a huge gap of trying to take a process that's been highly developed for a specific application inside of an operational world, and then say, I'm just going to take the raw data and throw it into a big vat, and hopefully pattern recognition will solve problems. The reality is that it's not that simple. With our customer base, and we have 1,000 of the world's top power and utility customers, where they're seeing value is when they actually are able to take some of this new technology and actually empower the people who understand the process with it.
Now, explain to me a little bit what you guys were saying earlier about how there's so much data being generated in these facilities that you couldn't necessarily put it all into the cloud if you wanted to. So what are the benefits of doing some of this processing on site rather than relying on the cloud for the processing?
This is an area that I am passionate about, and I like to say, if you like data, you're going to love the edge, because the data at the edge is older, bigger, and faster than all other types of big data combined. That's a rather extraordinary statement, but it can be backed up. There's not enough bandwidth sometimes to send all that data at the edge, number one. Number two is needing a response time. Number three...
Are we getting the 7 now?
You're getting the 7 now.
Okay, let's hear them.
And there will be a test, on this. Another one is simply reliability. I can't even make a cell phone call today without saying, can you hear me? et cetera. So there's a lot of reasons to do it at the edge because of the enormity of the data, as you point out. That's the reason. The data is so enormous. And even if it's not enormous, there's security reasons and data sovereignty and policy reasons, as well.
What were the rest of the 7?
One of them, of course, is the duplication that's needed. If you're going to do a store and forward, you build it all up at the edge. If you send 100% of it back, you're duplicating IT. And then if you send it to the data center, you'll have to duplicate your disaster recovery. So by being able to determine, by the way, with AI technology, what data is not even retainable, much less sendable, back to a cloud.
Tell me, what do you guys see coming 5 or 10 years from now in machine learning and AI that you can't do today? Ramon, what would you like to see from your service providers?
Well, that's a difficult question. I think everybody thinks of autonomous power plants. So power plants, that are run by machines. So I think that's a very easy way to imagine the future. We're talking about autonomous cars, maybe autonomous planes, and so maybe autonomous power plants, and there are some companies working on that. But I like to think more about risk management. So I think, because this is very much overall and across all industries, our business is managing risk. So that's why we have to take decisions when we do maintenance or what is, we have to take decisions sometimes, at the very quick decisions on what to do in the operations. But for example, when we go downstream and we think about the market, we have to, and we think about selling energy, we have to make trading decisions also. Do we get short? Do we get long in our purchases, in our sales? So I think risk management is all across there. And what we are expecting from the AI, I think in the future, and I don't know if 15 or 20 years will be enough time, is this predictability. So I think the world will become more predictable. So being able to predict what's going to happen better than what we are doing today, and not just based on intuition, but based on the intuition created by more data than one human being can absorb in a whole lifetime, that will help us take better decisions. So that's risk management, and to me, that's key. To me, that will make the world more boring, but it will make probably a better world.
That's a good point. Brian, Tom, I want to change that question a little bit for you. What are the idea is that the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed yet. What are the services that you are able to charge the most for, that generate the highest profit margins for you today, that you think will gradually become more broadly accepted by your customer base?
Sure, that's a great question. I think one of the most high-value capabilities with AI and the dimension of prediction, you use that word, predictive maintenance, predictive analytics. Who does not want to predict the future, right? What will my health be like? Will I have enough money at retirement? When will this panel end so I can take a break? Who does not want to predict the future, right? Who will I marry, on and on and on. So when we can impute that idea that has enamored mankind forever into the business world, in the world of maintenance of machinery, in the world of predicting inventory, including predicting the weather as well, that to me has the highest value because it can do so many things that we don't have enough time to get into detail with respect to the bottom line, as also with respect to revenue, generation as well.
And Brian, what would you add?
For us, we're a little bit different than being a software provider. I think the biggest opportunity in front of us, I'll just change it a little bit, is actually all around data management. I think one of the biggest, the big hope is that the consumer world will lead, that experience will fall into the business world. And of course, we always know that when we go home and our interaction we have with technology at home is very different than we walk into a corporation. And why is that? And a lot of it has to do with, I think there's a combination of things around how data is managed, the governance of the data, who owns the data, the quality of the data. There's so much work to be done. Everybody wants to talk about the newer technology and looking at whether it's chatbots on more of the enterprise side, on our side, more looking at AI to do autonomous power plant operation, but when they actually get into it, they recognize that their house is quite dirty and they don't want to invite anybody over. And so I think there's a huge opportunity, and I think you're going to see a big investment in companies actually driving towards data management as a strategy to ensure that they can actually take advantage of these technologies.
A lot of this stuff is pretty high level, and it's kind of, we're talking at the corporate level. Is there a way that we can bring it down to more of the retail, everyday person scenario here? I'm thinking in terms of smart meters. Smart meters were so big a few years ago. Every utility was installing smart meters. Have they done what these utility companies expected them to do, or have they become a real part of this machine learning evolution in the world?
I think they have done a lot, but they can do much more. But I think the problem is regulation in that area. So, depending on how the retail of the power is being done, you can do a lot of things. I mean, with a smart meter, you can do things like whenever the spot market or the price of the energy is very high, so I turn off my refrigerator.
People actually do that?
My car, which is connected, instead of being, being charged, it puts energy into the house. So there is a lot of things that can be done with data, and the smart meters provide data. Now, regulation is sometimes an obstacle for that, for those efficiencies to be gained in the systems. But it will be there. So I think most companies are getting prepared for that. And I think when companies like ours are looking at the downstream, we're thinking that there is a bright future, and we're thinking that all this digitalization is bringing the voice of the customer upstream, and the customer has a greater value. So whether we talk about smart meters, which is basically the voice of the customer, or any other thing, or installing my own generation at home, that's data that is very valuable, and that's a big source of business, and more importantly, it's a big source of efficiency in the overall system.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just real quick on, I think the smart meters have accomplished what they were set out to accomplish at first, and which was eliminating people going around and doing billing rounds. And I think it's done a good job at that. I think there's a whole hope that that data then can be used in other ways. But the real valuable data actually is in a place that's not at the meter. It's actually beyond the meter. And if you look at particular areas where you have the rise of battery and PV, or solar on rooftop solar, the real big efficiencies is how do you start to integrate that data set that quite frankly the utility doesn't own. It actually is owned by the individuals. And how do you actually start to bring that data set back into a bigger operational world so you can start to look at efficiencies across the entire value chain. I think that's a big opportunity that's out there, and you're seeing more and more investment in distributed resources, energy resources like that. And I think once we're able to start to bring those data sets together, I think there's some real big efficiencies that can be gained there.
Tom, along those lines, what are some solutions that you're providing at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise that might someday trickle down to the rest of us?
Well, they are at this point. And let me say, I'll just pick up on the smart meter quickly, because we have engaged with a energy company, CenterPoint Energy, in the great state of Texas right here. They have put many millions of smart meters out there. That did indeed at first eliminate someone reading physically. But beyond that, now it is able to help in aiding whether power is out and the restoration of power, which is automatic in many cases. That saves time, it saves energy, it also saves, or let me say, it also increases safety, because sending somebody out to discover something, especially in a storm or an act of God, is of course dangerous. Now with the data, it's evolving. Smart is a relative term. It was really smart when you didn't, when it could tell you what the meter reading was. Today we don't consider that necessarily smart. The application of AI at the meter in the home, I think you were alluding to as well, will be this notion of being able to get that data, which is vast, right? And then in my world, in my subset of what we do in Hewlett-Packard Enterprise is at the edge, and how quickly we can manage it, as well. But today, your dog food bowl can tweet you when it's empty. Right? I don't know the business value. It might be good for the dog. But the point is, everything will be connected in a home. It will be related to the fundamental things in the home, such as water, electricity, and then media, right? Internet and cable or satellite coming in as well. It's a great world, but all those different things that will be connected. Everything is a thing in the IoT, and it will be connected, and that will be a big, big data flood that we need as a industry to help users like that figure out how to get the value. And let me say one more thing. Not just the value of the data, but acting on it. Acting on the data is the most important thing. It's the reason one would deploy a solution. Not just to collect data, not just to analyze it and print out pretty graphs, but it's to take action in your business.
Well, along those same lines, in recent weeks we saw these forced blackouts in California where PG&E shut down the power because they were afraid of fires breaking out. Can you think of ways in which we could use machine learning and AI to help keep the lights on in California? What are some things that the utilities might not be doing that they haven't even thought of yet, but that you guys have already been dreaming about?
We solved that, I probably would be standing up here. I'd be counting my money. I think that it's a tough problem to solve. I'm a California resident. I've had my power shut off recently, quite frequently, unfortunately. I mean, a lot of that has.
You must have been thinking, well, why can't we use AI to tell exactly where the winds are going to be strongest and where to shut off on a smaller basis than all of Northern California?
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of that has to do with risk mitigation around financial implications than anything else, I think. But I mean, I think imagery for sure. I mean, AI does a great job with imagery. I think that using satellites and so forth. The challenge in California is that the infrastructure is really old and it's all above ground. And in areas where we've had lots of vegetation growth, and so it's a real tough problem to solve because this is the case, quite frankly, across a lot of our industrial customers. Our customer base that I work with, many of them are working with power plants built in the 50s, processing plants that were built decades ago, and the cost to take them down is really expensive. So it's not as simple. I'm just going to come in and go replace it. You actually have to try to retrofit and try to do optimization within some really tough confines. And so I think that the challenge that they're facing is actually a very complex one, and there's no real easy solution. But I think AI will definitely help in the area of imagery and looking at satellite and those types of things.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think AI cannot do everything. No? They cannot substitute transmission lines or all power plants, but it can add efficiency in the system. So indirectly, it can help this infrastructure to be more efficiently installed or deployed. So yeah, that's probably the way, but we cannot think, and then we've seen that in our business, like companies advertising AI is going to, or machine learning is going to solve all your problems. That's impossible. No, there are things that are related to the equipment failure, et cetera, but the substitution of such equipment is probably getting at a lower cost thanks to the efficiencies that this machine learning or AI or deep learning or this type of techniques are adding to the whole value chain.
Now, the application of AI is going to be uneven across the world. Different countries approach this in a different way. In China, for instance, you have to be okay with AI watching you everywhere you go and taking pictures of your face. We don't have that yet in the United States. But along those same lines, which countries, which parts of the world will be quicker to adopt all of these novel ways of computing?
Well, we talk about AI as if it's a person or a single thing.
Soon it may be. Yeah.
And we will put anthropomorphic technology. And indeed, the founder of this company, Spark Cognition, Amir, as many of you know, talks about the sentient machine and a thinking machine. It's interesting to look at. I'll let my colleagues talk about what companies might adopt quicker. I will believe that some third world countries will adopt slower simply because the labor is less cost. So anytime you adopt anything new, regardless of its entry cost or its sustaining cost of operation, there's an inhibitor, and therefore if labor can be applied in many ways. Now, not completely, but in many ways. So we may see slower adoption in third world. There will be some exceptions as well. And if you'd like to comment on the first movers, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think, I mean, there is this term, the productivity paradox, which is productivity paradox.
Okay.
So it's how all these technologies are not, they seem not to be increasing the productivity overall. No? So we have a lot of new technology and software and now AI, and they're not contributing. I mean, there are many reasons for that, maybe the aggregation of these improvements and other reasons, but one of them to me is cultures, is habits. So I mean, you can have the best technology, but you don't take full advantage of that technology or you don't adopt it. So I think the previous group was working about that, about the culture. And so that happens within companies, that happens within countries, societies. So I think we will see, I mean, we have two extremes. Now, China, where this will be imposed, so the culture will be changed by government. That's the way we tend to think about China, even I've never been there. But then you have societies that adapt quickly to changes or that have a more flexible economic and cultural systems. I think US is one good example. Europe is probably the example of a slower adaptation to these changes and more regulated systems where probably these adoptions will take a little bit more time.
Is Mexico more like the Europe model?
Yeah, I think it's somehow in the middle. It has both sides influence, but I think it's a good ground because I think culturally it's a country where people tend to adapt quickly to changes. So yeah, I would say it's in the middle way between US and Europe.
In the minute that we have left, can you guys tell me about the eureka moment in your career where you realized machine learning and AI really was going to be an enormous deal for now and for the future?
So for me, it's going to be interacting with a customer. I was working with a specific customer. Actually, Freeport-McMoRan was the customer, big mining customer of ours. And they came back to us and they said, I was sitting with a customer and said, what's your big data strategy to us? And of course, I kind of looked at my colleague at the time and I was, what is he talking about? I had no idea. This is before Hadoop was even really talked about. They were kind of a first mover themselves in trying to adapt, and adopt some of this new technology. I think the eureka moment for me was kind of the rise of HDFS, and Hadoop was kind of the first thing that kind of brought my, and really it was all of a sudden you had the ability to store limitless data, and really were able to enable limitless amount of compute. Even
How many years
expensive.
ago was that, do you think?
You check mine now. It was quite a while ago, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, something like that.
Tom, how about you?
Let me comment on not the value of AI, but its accessibility, how accessible and democratized it could be. When I realized that computing can move out to the edge and we can execute AI as well as video analytics, things that are very high compute intensive as well. The fact that there's value, we can find these use cases, but the fact that there's now value in a third place, meaning not only the first place called on premises, not only the second place called a cloud, but yet a third place called the edge. Once it's spread that way geographically, that was a moment of excitement for me.
Ramon, what would you add? Well, I was thinking about that right now, but I really don't have that moment. I think it's I'm willing for that to happen.
We suppliers
so
can help you
it's
with
maybe
that,
more in our imagination, or maybe my imagination goes much faster than reality, and that's maybe why I don't get surprised by all of this. I think we are seeing a progressive change, but honestly speaking, I think we are now in the very beginning of this. So we are not seeing, I mean, I worked in the university with neural networks, and I did a thesis on neural networks. So I mean, that was a few years ago.
So you're wondering what's taken so long?
20-something years ago. So I know what neural networks are. I think, well, now we have more data. Now we have faster computers, so it's totally different. I think quantum computing, that was, there was a presentation in the morning that might change things dramatically, but we still want to see that leap. I'm still waiting for that, and I'm sure it will happen. That's why, as a company, we want to be there. We want to be in that game. But still, I haven't seen that leap that we will for sure we will see.
Well, that's the challenge to the developers to impress you in the years to come. Thank you, everyone. That's great.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, guys.